Breaking news, TJ Lane, the Chardon High School shooter, on the loose right now. He escaped this evening from a prison in western Ohio.
20-year-old Chad Padilla was found unconscious Monday in his cell near Texarkana. Investigators believe he committed suicide.
Most school shooters would rather take their own lives than face the horrors of prison. But for those who survive the aftermath, life behind bars is like a descent into hell, filled with regret, threats, and sometimes even death, as seen with the infamous Italy school shooter Chad Padilla.
And a man convicted of shooting a classmate in a North Texas high school cafeteria back in 2018 has died in prison.
January 22, 2018, 16-year-old Chad Padilla, who attended Italy High School in the Ellis County town of Italy, Texas, took a .380 caliber handgun into the school's cafeteria with one mission: to put an end to a teen couple's relationship. Now, before this, Padilla had accumulated a long history of violent behavior at this same school. One classmate, Cassie Hook, who claims all the warning signs were there, told authorities about Padilla making a hit list of people he wanted to murder back in 8th grade, and her name was on it. Then in 2017, a year before the shooting, Padilla got angry during class and threw a pair of scissors at her friend, and later threw a computer against a wall. No one knows what the repercussions of his actions were back then, but now he was about to send an innocent girl to her grave. And the motive? He was jealous of her relationship with this other dude. At least that's what authorities believe. On that dreadful day, Padilla, concealing a weapon, walked right up to his classmate, Michaela Jones, who was enjoying lunch with her boyfriend. Kayla noticed him look pretty angry, so she tried to give him a hug and told him to sit down with her. But Padilla backed away and said,
"Sorry it had to end this way,"
before drawing out his gun and opening fire on her. Michaela managed to run outside the cafeteria. As Padilla chased her, she didn't get too far before 6 bullets were lodged in her neck, abdomen, and foot. Other students took the opportunity to run outside the cafeteria while Padilla blended into the crowd to escape. But this escape was short-lived, as many witnesses had identified him to law enforcement as the shooter. Padilla, who had also texted his parents to say he loved him and to apologize for what he was about to do, didn't resist when Ellis County police officers pulled up to his home with an arrest warrant. Chad Padilla consequently pled guilty to attempted capital murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon after it was confirmed that Michaela survived the attack. In 2019, he was handed 2 40-year prison sentences to run concurrently and would have been eligible for parole after 20 years. But barely 3 years into his sentence, Padilla was mysteriously found dead in his cell. At around 1:50 a.m. on March 21, 2022, Chad Padilla, now 20 years old, was found unresponsive in his cell by jail staff at the Barry B. Telford Unit Prison in Texas. He was taken to the medical facility where EMS and paramedics confirmed him dead. No records show what exactly happened, but his death was ruled a suicide. This marked a hauntingly fitting end for Padilla, a man who had brought so much pain and devastation to others. Some believed he got off easy and deserved a far more brutal fate. However, the story of this next school shooter takes a different turn, as he was stupid enough to stir chaos within the walls of his prison facility. January 18, 1993, 17-year-old Scott Pennington took his father's .38 caliber revolver and discreetly placed it in his duffel bag style backpack as he was heading off to East Carter High School in Kentucky. At around 2:45 p.m., Pennington walks into his 7th period English class and pulls out that gun. His teacher, Deanna McDavid, was his first target. He missed the first shot. Students started screaming, and Mrs. McDavid asks,
"What are you doing, Scott?"
His cold response?
"Shut up."
The next shot hit McDavid square in the forehead, instantly killing her. Students really believed this was a staged drama skit, but the sad reality was that Pennington wanted to kill her for failing him in her class. At least by his standards. You see, Pennington's anger toward Mrs. McDavid had been brewing for some time. She'd given him a C on his midterm English exam, which tarnished his otherwise impressive academic record filled with A's and B's. Now, Pennington had asked her to reconsider the grade, but she refused, infuriating him even more. But it wasn't just the grade that concerned Mrs. McDavid. It was the disturbing content in Pennington's writing assignments that kept her up at night. His essays, specifically one about Stephen King's novel Rage were filled with violent imagery and themes of death, leaving McDavid wondering how much of it mimicked what he read and how much of it really reflected his inner thoughts. She'd even raised her concerns with fellow teachers, fearing for Pennington's mental state and worrying he might harm himself, and this is why she refused to change his grade. But Pennington, believing he was too smart to get a C, drew up a plan to take her life. So after he successfully did that, Pennington took his classmates hostage, initially holding them all inside the room. Shortly after, he allowed 2 students to leave, and over time, he let more go in pairs. By 3:01 p.m., the remaining 5 hostages were released, and Pennington walked out of the classroom, surrendering to 2 armed officers waiting just outside. In the aftermath of this tragic event, Pennington revealed his motive to be his clear dislike for Mrs. McDavid and his hopes of receiving the death penalty. Well, they didn't give him the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. But for some reason, Pennington, or should I say Mr. Smartypants here, wasn't satisfied with the damage he had done. So while incarcerated at the Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex in West Liberty, Kentucky, he brutally attacked a contract food service employee within the facility. The employee, Joanne Smith, was so injured that he had to be flown by a chopper to the hospital, where he sat in there for months. Thankfully, though, he survived that attack, while Pennington was charged with first-degree assault. It's crazy to think that, given that this attack happened in April 2014, and Pennington would have been eligible for parole in January 2018, he'd served 21 years of his sentence, but for this action, he was handed an additional 20 years. Now at 48 years old, there's no telling what Gary Scott Pennington might do next in pursuit of that death penalty he's craved for years. And with this new sentence, he might never walk out of those prison walls a free man. Speaking of being free, this next school shooter tried to break out of prison, but had the worst plan for it.
In Ohio, a teenager convicted of a high school shooting that killed 3 students is back in custody after daring escape overnight.
Chardon shooter T.J. Lane, the 19-year-old convicted killer, has been taken into custody after escaping in the Allen Correctional Facility in Lima, Ohio.
So we have bootleg Michael Schofield, T.J. Lane, thinking he can pull off a grand escape from prison, but his plan fell apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. And this came after Lane had orchestrated one of the deadliest school shootings in modern history. February 27, 2012, Chardon High School in Ohio became the scene of a tragic shooting that left 6 students wounded and 3 dead. The shooter, 17-year-old T.J. Lane. Now, Thomas Michael T.J. Lane was a sophomore at Lake Academy, an alternative school for students with special needs. This place, Lane had issues with a fellow student named Russell King Jr., who had allegedly been threatening him. This made Lane hit the gym and prep for a fight with that dude. Now, we're not sure if that fight ever happened, but it did lead to him bringing a .22 caliber handgun and offloading bullets while students were gathered at the school's cafeteria. And it's no surprise that one of the first victims he targeted was Russell King Jr., along with 5 other students Lane apparently hated. Lane later claimed that he ran out of bullets and rather than reload, he simply waited for police to arrive. 3 of his victims, including King, died from their injuries in the days that followed. By March 1st, 2012, Lane was charged as an adult with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of attempted aggravated murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. This was when his attitude took a dark turn. At his sentencing, Lane takes off his dress shirt, revealing this white tee with the word killer scrawled on it. Unfazed by his sentence of 3 consecutive life terms without parole, Lane made headlines for uttering this bizarre statement to the parents of his victims.
Saying pull the trigger to kill your sons, now raises the memory of you.
Only a true degenerate would say such in court, but Lane wasn't done showing the world how much of a retard he was. While incarcerated at the Allen Correctional Institution in Lima, Ohio, Lane had been disciplined 7 times in 18 months. This would include 2 attempts at giving himself tattoos and urinating on a prison wall, each of which led to his recreational privileges being suspended for about a week or 10 days. But he wasn't done. He and 2 older inmates tried escaping from this place on September 11th, 2014. The escape attempt began at 7:38 p.m., triggering a fence alarm as the inmates scaled it. By 7:45 p.m., law enforcement was alerted to the breach. A staff member spotted the group at 7:47 p.m. and managed to catch one escapee, 33-year-old child killer Lindsay Bruce. Now, these guys had spent months constructing a ladder using materials from a crawl space near the recreation yard, and they used that ladder to climb a building near the prison's entrance. jumping 15 feet down and fleeing through a soybean field. News of Lane's escape terrified his old schoolmates and teachers that the entire Chardon school district had to cancel school the next day, fearing that he might want to enact another shooting. Lane evaded capture for nearly 6 hours, but was eventually found about 100 yards from the prison by a police dog in a wooded area. This kid was in a medium security prison, but after that crap, Lane got transferred to the Ohio State Penitentiary, a supermax prison, where he's going to be held for 23 hours a day in his cell. How'd that work out for you?
Robert Ledford remembers the gunman, Eric Houston, a high school dropout who stormed onto campus with a .22 caliber rifle and a shotgun. In all, 4 people died and 10 others were injured before the gunman finally surrendered.
You know, it's not often that school shooters face the death penalty, mainly because they're usually minors. But what happens when a 20-year-old man grabs a gun and decides to slaughter a bunch of innocent kids? Well, this fucker gets condemned to death row. That's what happens. May 1st, 1992. 20-year-old Eric Houston, former student of Lyndhurst High School in Olivehurst, California, would return to campus armed with a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a sawed-off .22 caliber rifle. As soon as he gets into the school, Houston fatally shoots Robert Brenz, his former civics teacher. Without hesitation, he kills Judy Davis, a student in Brent's classroom, before continuing on his rampage. As he makes it down the hallway, he shoots and kills student Jason Edward White. Even though the school went into lockdown, Houston wasn't finished. He entered a classroom with around 30 students in it, and within minutes would take 80 people hostage. Now, to fully grasp what the hell happened, it's crucial to understand what drove Houston to such a horrific act. Houston had been spiraling after losing his job, and his failure to graduate from high school or even get a GED would only fuel his frustrations. So during his time at Lyndhurst High, he had dropped out due to poor grades, and from that point on, his life seemed to unravel. His relationship ended, he couldn't keep his job, and he harbored deep resentment toward Mr. Brenz, the teacher who had failed him in an economics class back in 1989. So none of this justifies the senseless killings. But for Houston, his anger and bitterness had reached a breaking point. Once he had control of the classroom, Houston held his hostages for an intense 8-hour standoff with police, releasing several of them throughout the day while negotiating. By the end of the ordeal, at around 10 p.m., he finally surrendered after being promised, falsely, that he'd serve no more than 5 years in a minimum security prison. Now in his 40s, Houston remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison, California's oldest prison, and the only one housing male death row inmates. Since his incarceration, his behavior hasn't been exemplary, but he may become the first person executed by the state since 2006. If carried out, Houston would face death by lethal injection, the only method currently allowed under California law. Despite that, Houston has appealed his sentence, but the California Supreme Court upheld his trial and confirmed the death penalty.
Michael Carneal was 14 years old when he walked into the lobby of Heath High School in Paducah and opened fire on a prayer group. He killed 3 students and injured 5 others.
The man who shot and killed 3 people at a Paducah high school 25 years ago will not get out of prison.
To this day, I still don't understand why he even has the option of parole.
In September 2022, residents of West Paducah, Kentucky, grew uneasy at the news of Michael Carneal, the man who had shaken their community 25 years ago, was about to get out of jail. His actions had drawn reporters from across the country and left lasting sorrow to his victims and all those affected by his actions. You see, back in the 90s, Carneal was a victim of bullying, depression, and extreme paranoia while he attended Heath High School in Kentucky. His paranoia would make him cover vents and windows at his house, feared he was being watched, while he would also avoid his classmates. In 1997, his mental breakdown reached its breaking point, making Carneal plot out a very deadly school shooting. So weeks before the incident, he would steal a .38 caliber handgun from his parents, intending to sell it, though another student ended up taking it after threatening to report him. Carneal would hint to his classmates that something big was going to happen, but given he was already the weird kid in class, no one took him seriously. This kid stole various firearms from both his house and a neighbor's residence, and on Thanksgiving Day, he took several rifles, ammunition, and even earplugs from his neighbor's garage. He also went back to take the .22 pistol and mags, as well as 2 shotguns from his father's closet. Now it's December 1st, 1999. 1997, the Monday after Thanksgiving, Carneal carries a shotgun and rifle wrapped in a blanket to school. He disguised the weapons as an art project and also had a loaded .22 caliber pistol in his backpack. He arrived on campus at around 7:45 a.m. with his sister, and immediately he gets past the gate, puts his earplugs in, takes his pistol out, and fires 10 shots at a student prayer group, leaving 3 dead and 10 injured. But right after he fired, it seemed like Carneal snapped out of an illusion as he dropped the pistol, surrendered to the principal, and yelled that he should also be killed. He would tell reporters that he couldn't pinpoint a single reason for his actions apart from his misguided belief that his parents and classmates hated him. Fast forward about 10 months later, Carneal takes a plea deal that factored in his mental illness. Yet the plea deal added an unexpected twist to an already dark and unsettling case. As part of this deal, and because he was a minor at the time of the crime, Carneal was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Now this raised the unsettling prospect that he could become one of the first school shooters ever released from prison. But while the thought of his release was frightening enough for the community, Carneal faced even more challenges during his time behind bars. He was initially held at Northern Kentucky Youth Development Center, but when he turned 18, he was taken to the Kentucky State Reformatory in LaGrange, where he remains incarcerated to this day. But in 2007, Carneal, after getting diagnosed with schizotypal personality disorder and dysthymia, appealed that he was too mentally unwell to have pleaded guilty to the Heath High School shooting, so he requested a retrial, but his appeal was denied. 5 years later, in 2012, Carneal again sought to withdraw his guilty plea, stating that he was mentally ill when he entered it. However, later that year, his appeal was again rejected. Then, in the final attempt to get out of jail, Carneal applied for parole in 2022, having completed his 25-year jail term. But the Kentucky Parole Board unanimously rejected his parole request and ultimately made him ineligible for any future parole hearings. Now, at 39 years old, his dreams of getting out of this place are gone.
Friends and families and the whole community, that I'm sorry for what I did. I know it's not going to change anything, it's not going to make anything better, but I want them to know that I am sorry for what I did.
Brenda, what I have read is you have no remorse about all of this, but I sit here and you're filled with remorse.
Every day I live with, the knowledge that I took the lives of children. And that's real difficult.
For a woman who set the stage for high-profile shootings in America over the last 40 years, you'd think her life behind bars would be a living hell, right? Well, hold on to that thought. Shockingly enough, she's now trying to get out.
I don't sit here and plan on how to go out and kill people and stuff like that. That's not how I am or who I am.
January 29th, 1979, we have Brenda opening fire at Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California. Armed with a rifle she got as a Christmas gift from her father, she tragically kills 2 adults and wounds 8 children and a police officer. Now, while the U.S. criminal justice system ensured that her crime didn't go unpunished, her life behind bars and her constant need to get parole tell a different story. For context here, Brenda's early life was marked by hardship and violence. She was raised by her lonely father, Nikolas Spencer, who was an alcoholic. They would live in this filthy, poverty-stricken apartment littered with beer and whiskey bottles. Nikolas Spencer was a passionate gun collector, and his daughter Brenda seemed to take an early interest in that hobby. People who knew Brenda during her teenage years also noted that she experimented with drugs and engaged in minor theft. She didn't really care about school and had a strong dislike for authority. At one point, the police received a report that she had fantasized about being a sniper and would often shoot at birds in her neighborhood. School authorities would also inform her father about Brenda's risk of suicide, but for some reason, he dismissed their concerns and told them to leave his family alone. Once again, a psych eval would recommend that she'd be hospitalized due to her being a danger to herself and others. But again, her father refused. Instead, he would give her a Ruger semi-automatic rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition as a Christmas gift. Merry Christmas. I mean, while it's obvious her father probably wanted her to kill herself, Brenda's behavior became increasingly alarming, to the point where her friends say that she frequently talked about her desire to kill someone. And just a week before that tragic shooting, she tells her classmates that she plans to do something big to get on TV. On the morning of the incident, 16-year-old Brenda starts her day by taking her epilepsy medicine with a shot of whiskey. And as we know, the rest is history. So she was arrested and charged as an adult with 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. Her attorney tried getting her a reduced sentence under an insanity plea deal, but it never came to fruition. Instead, she was given concurrent terms of 25 years to life in prison. She's been serving that sentence at California's Institution for Women in Corona. In the beginning, she used to work on repairing electronics, but after time, her focus shifted to finding ways to secure her release. Now, her first parole hearing came in 1993, and during that hearing, Brenda claimed that she was hoping to be killed by police during that shootout, and that she had been using drugs and alcohol days before the shooting, although the tests conducted at the time of her arrest showed otherwise. And at her second parole hearing in 2001, she made new allegations, accusing her father of physical and sexual abuse. But the parole board was skeptical of her claims, given it took so many years for her to bring that up. But nonetheless, her father was a very nasty man. So nasty, in fact, that he married Brenda's 17-year-old prison cellmate and brought her to live in that same house from where the school shooting happened. They would even have a baby daughter together before he finally passed away. So in 2005, Spencer attempts to claim insanity, arguing that the words etched in her arm, "unforgiven and alone," were in fact meant to say courage and pride. She spent years fighting to be moved to a mental institution, but in 2009, the parole board denied her request once again, deciding she wouldn't be eligible for reconsideration until 2019. And in August 2020, Brenda, now 60 years old, and having served 42 years behind bars, was once again denied parole, with the board ruling her next possible hearing to be 2025. The big question now is, will she finally be granted her freedom? I guess only time will tell.
You know, you're the cause of people's dying, and I really don't want to cause them any more pain. I hope that they're all doing okay, that they're all, you know, that I haven't scarred them for life.
For a school shooter who spends decades behind bars, you'd think they might have tried to change their violent ways by now. But when you claim to be under the control of a satanic mastermind, well then prison life seems to be more of a thrill than a punishment. Let's go to the night of September 30th, 1997. Woodham called his friend, Lucas Thompson, and told him that he wanted to kill his mother, Mary Ann Woodham, the following morning. Now, Lucas didn't think Woodham had the balls to do something like that, so he naively took it as a very expensive joke. However, it was anything but a joke. The next morning, as Woodham's mother walked down the stairs from her room, Woodham strikes her in the head with a baseball bat and slashes her multiple times with a butcher knife till she stopped fighting back. Following the murder, Luke covered his mother's face with a pillow, and nearly 2.5 hours later, he would steal her car and go to Pearl High School, where he orchestrates one of the deadliest school shootings at the time. He takes his first shot at Christina Menefee. Now, Woodham had specifically targeted Christina because they dated briefly a year prior, and as students began to flee, Lydia Dew, who had been standing next to Christina, tried to run but was shot in the back. But despite being gravely injured, Lydia was still conscious and speaking when a teacher arrived to help her. At this point, Woodham had lost control. He started firing randomly at the fleeing crowd. In this, Stephanie Wiggins would get hit, who suffered a shattered hip and endured multiple surgeries with extensive therapy to recover. Another student, Jerry Safely, who was actually friends with Woodham, was shot in the leg while trying to shield his girlfriend. And after realizing he had just shot his friend, Woodham got close to Jerry and apologized, before firing a few more shots and running out of the school's premises. While the chaos unfolded, assistant principal at the time, Joel Myrick, ran to his truck, where he kept a Colt 45 pistol. This former National Guard Combat Unit commander loaded his gun and headed straight toward Woodham, who was already in his mother's car, planning to drive off. However, Luke's getaway was delayed when he got stuck behind a parked car at a stop sign. Pause allowed Joel to run ahead and position himself in Luke's path. Startled by the sight side of Joel with a gun. Luke swerves off the road, but left the emergency brake on, and his car loses traction on some wet grass and stops near an embankment. Joel held Luke at gunpoint until the police arrived to arrest him. This entire attack, from start to finish, lasted about 10 minutes. After his arrest, Woodham would confess to the murders. But during his confession, he made disturbing comments like,
"I guess the world's gonna remember me now,"
and excitedly told detectives that he would become famous. So he said he killed his mom because he never loved her, and she would have stopped him from stealing the car. But he also said that he was part of a satanic group known as the Croft. He was initiated by his friend, Grant Boyette, and Grant would be the evil mastermind who manipulated him into carrying out the school shooting. In total, Woodham shot 7 people and killed 2, and right now he's serving 3 life sentences plus 140 years. But his time behind bars wouldn't change his violent nature. This guy was moved between multiple prison facilities due to his troubling behavior, including numerous altercations with other inmates and a lack of cooperation with prison authorities. After entering the Mississippi Department of Corrections system in 1998, he was initially placed at Central Mississippi Correctional Facility for an evaluation before being transferred to Mississippi State Pen, commonly known as Parchman. He was incarcerated there until 2022, which then they transferred him to Unit 3 of the South Mississippi Correctional Institution. Now, despite his attempts to seek clemency in the past, such as a notable request of the Mississippi Governor, Haley Barbour, in 2010, all his requests have been denied, and he continues to serve his life sentence without parole.
First, breaking right now, the man accused in a shooting rampage at Santa Fe High School has been transferred to a state mental health facility.
Gorge's attorney says that his client will likely be declared incompetent to stand trial. He says 3 experts all came to that same conclusion.
And now the families are learning about this unwelcome update in the case.
May 18th, 2018, a tragic shooting takes place at Santa Fe High School, located in the Houston metro area of Santa Fe, Texas. The shooter was identified as 17-year-old student Demetrios Pagurtzis. Now, 2 months before this, Demetrios logged on to the LuckyGunner.com website and purchased 2 rounds of 38 special ammunition and 105 rounds of 12-gauge shotgun ammunition. 2 weeks later, he bought another 35 rounds of 12-gauge shotgun ammo. In both these instances, he didn't need to show proof of age, since he used an American Express gift card. Oh, he used his real name and address for shipment. Both orders would be approved and shipped through FedEx, and he would even decline the adult signature requirement. On the day of the shooting, Pagurtzis would get into his art class and fire his weapon while singing "Another One Bites the Dust" by rock band Queen. I mean, God knows what reality he was living right then. Or maybe he just wanted to turn the song's lyrics into a reality. Now, students would take refuge in a storage closet of that art classroom, but the shooter fired his shotgun through that door, and then he briefly left the room, giving the students a chance to try to barricade the door. However, he forced his way back in, spotting a familiar face, to which he chillingly says, "Surprise!" Santa Fe ISD police officers get to the scene quickly and engage in a gunfight with the shooter, with one officer critically injured and rushed to the hospital. After the shooter fired into the ceramics room, more officers, including a Texas Highway Patrol trooper, confronted him, hoping for a peaceful surrender. Instead, he fired at him while making threats. Eventually, he gave up after sustaining injuries. Now fast forward a few months later, and that's when the real drama began. Pagurtzis was taken to the Galveston County Jail, facing 2 serious felony charges: capital murder involving multiple victims and aggravated assault on a police officer. But because of his age, he wasn't eligible for the death penalty or life without parole. So if convicted of capital murder, he could be sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 40 years. And you're probably asking, hasn't he been convicted? Well, I hate to break it to you, but Pagurtzis hasn't. November 4th, 2019, 3 experts deemed Demetrios mentally unfit for trial. They sent him to North Texas State Hospital, and he's been there ever since. In March 2020, after getting another evaluation confirming that he still wasn't competent and unlikely to improve within 90 days, a judge ordered his continued treatment for at least a year. But now, he's been ruled unfit for over 3 years, and his commitment to the mental facility has been extended each time. What about the families of his victims? Where the hell's the justice? Each extension of his treatment delays the closure they desperately seek, deepening that frustration and pain of never really seeing him fully held accountable for the lives he shattered. To them, it's like the system failed them and just loves to add to their suffering.
Teen school shooter Ethan Crumbley sentenced to life in prison without parole for killing 4 students at a Michigan school.
We miss Tate. Our family has a permit hole in it.
Ethan Crumbley's life behind bars is far more dangerous than we could ever imagine. After orchestrating the Oxford High School shooting, Ethan Crumbley was held in isolation at the Oakland County Jail. In compliance with state and federal laws, he was kept out of sight and sound from all adult inmates, which meant spending his entire time in some form of solitary confinement. And because of the severity of that crime and his public statements regarding self-harm, he would be placed on suicide watch as well. He was demanded to wear a tough, indestructible nylon and Velcro suit, as seen during his arraignment, and his cell contained nothing but a mattress and bedding to match his suicide watch attire. His interactions were limited to occasional visits from the jail psychologist or his lawyer, as his parents, facing their own criminal charges, weren't allowed to visit him. Day after day, Crumbley remained in his cell, completely alone and with nothing to occupy his time. While this barely begins to capture the harsh reality of his life behind bars, many argue that it mirrors the punishment he deserves for the monstrous acts he committed. Back in November 30th, 2021, Oxford High School in Michigan would become the site of a deadly mass shooting that left 4 students dead and 7 others injured. 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley was the shooter, but this incident was like none seen before. Ethan Crumbley was raised in this really dysfunctional family, with both of his parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, having criminal histories involving DUI and check fraud. When the family moved to Issaquah, Washington, Ethan's life would take a dark turn. Often left alone at home, he spent his times playing these violent video games and just binge-watching horror movies. Over the years, he developed a disturbing fascination with demons and began experiencing severe depression. He even sent desperate texts to his mom, sharing his troubling thoughts about seeing demons, but she seemed to ignore his cries for help. Things take a more dangerous turn when Ethan's father buys a 9mm semi-automatic handgun just days before the shooting, and it was at this point that the voices in Ethan's head take over, which help him descend into his violent spiral. Get this, the day before the attack, Ethan raises his own concerns about his own behavior with the school's officials, but no action was taken. Then, on the morning of the shooting, a teacher discovers a disturbing drawing on Ethan's desk. It shows a semi-automatic handgun pointing at the words, "The thoughts won't stop. Help me." And next to that, "The world is dead." Well, the teacher took a photo of that and reported it, but by this time, a handgun was already concealed in Ethan's backpack. His parents were called into the school after that teacher had filed a report of the drawing she took a photo of. But guys, shockingly, they refused to take their kid home and instead allowed him to return to class. Well, that decision would prove fatal, as just hours later, Ethan gets the gun from his backpack, goes into the restroom, and starts his horrific rampage. He opens fire in the hallways, targeting students during passing time, and even walks into the classrooms, shooting at those who couldn't hide. In the aftermath, 4 poor students died, and 7 others were injured, including a teacher. Quickly disarmed him and arrested him. But it doesn't end here. He was charged as an adult with 24 crimes, including murder and terrorism, and he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole in December 2023. But Ethan turned 18 in April 2024, and he was transferred to the Oaks Correctional Facility in Manistee, Michigan, where he's currently held in a protective custody unit. The facility, housing over 1,000 inmates, has various security levels, including level 2 and level 4 units, and features a protective housing section for prisoners at risk due to their notoriety, maybe former law enforcement roles, or those needing extra safety in general. Now, life in this protective custody is kinda safer than general population, but it's still dangerous. The facility is known for its harsh environment. Prisoners here face isolation and constant tension, and it's designed to have that effect of the infamous Alcatraz. Inmates like Ethan are kept separate to avoid violence from the general population, but the atmosphere is described as one that could crush the spirit, with frequent attempts at self-harm and suicide amongst inmates. Now, this unit is not entirely free from dangers like mental distress or potential conflicts with other inmates who are also in here for their own safety reasons. And considering his crime, Ethan would be a high-profile and easy target. So despite being placed in protective custody, there's a chance Ethan may still encounter aggression from other inmates, whether for his youth, his crime, or simply as a target for gang activity or exploitation. Navigating this environment will require a lot from him, even in this supposed supposedly safer part of the prison.
All I want is for the people I hurt to just have a final sense of culpability that justice has somewhat been served in any capacity.
Well, there's outrage tonight in Florida from the parents of the victims of the Parkland school shooting. A jury spared convicted killer Nikolas Cruz from the death penalty and instead recommended a sentence of life without parole.
They had been hoping for the death penalty, and now many are disgusted that he was spared and will instead spend the rest of his life in prison.
Where do I even begin with this one? I mean, there are evil people in the world, but very few compared to the cruelty of Nikolas Cruz. This individual is responsible for the horrific shooting at Parkland High School, where he took the lives of 17 people and injured 17 others. Born September 24th, 1998, Cruz's life was also marked by huge tragedy from the start. He lived with his biological mother, Brenda Norma Woodham, who was a convicted felon and a drug addict. After her death, Cruz was adopted by Roger and Linda Cruz, a couple who eventually passed away as well, leaving him orphaned once again. In the midst of all these losses, Cruz struggled with issues of his own. Between 2014 and 17, Cruz bounced between 6 different schools in an effort to address his behavioral problems. In 2014, he was placed in a school specifically for children with emotional or learning disabilities. But even there, he made threats against other students. And despite these warning signs, in February 2017, Cruz legally purchased an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle from a Coral Springs gun store, passing the necessary background check. This gun joined an already growing collection that included at least one shotgun and several other rifles. On social media, Cruz wouldn't hide the fact that he was crazy, including a Snapchat image of him cutting himself and a chilling YouTube comment claiming that he'd one day become a shooter. February 14th, 2018. What should have been Valentine's Day turned into a day of terror. Cruz opened fire at Parkland High School, killing 17 students and staff members in a brutal attack. We've talked about this many times. We're going to leave out some gruesome details, but it's enough to say that it was an act of unimaginable cruelty. Cruz initially fled the scene on foot, blending in with other students to escape. However, his freedom was short-lived as he was identified and arrested just over an hour later. Finally, on November 2nd, 2022, Cruz was given 34 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Thank God. One for each of the victims he murdered and wounded. But his sentence was met with disgust from the public and relatives of his victims. They believed if there was anybody in this world who deserved the death penalty, it would have definitely been Cruz. I mean, killing 17 people is crazy work. And even some inmates now currently on death row haven't committed such a preposterous crime. So why exactly wasn't he handed the death sentence? Well, 2 words: the jury.
Today, the wrong verdict was given. Someone killed 17 people, attempted to kill another 17, and we let them get away with it.
You see, in Florida, there are 16 aggravating factors that can be used to support a death sentence, like the crime being especially cruel or carried out in a cold, calculated manner. At least one of these factors must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt to warrant an execution. So, throughout Cruz's trial, the prosecutors made a strong case, arguing that the aggravating factors were undeniable. On the other hand, his defense team painted a different picture, claiming Cruz was doomed from the start due to his mom's heavy drinking and smoking during pregnancy. They argued that this led to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which had shaped his behavior. Whether you like it or not, both sides presented compelling points, but in the end, the jury couldn't come to a unanimous decision on the death penalty, leaving Cruz with a life sentence instead. Now, while the details about his time in prison remain scarce, there are whispers that Cruz is being kept in a special unit, away from other inmates. Some say it's for his protection, because I'll tell you, there's a lot of people in here that would love to carry out that death penalty for themselves, faster than any court ever could.
All the message I have for the people who think it's a great idea to bring a weapon to school, I'm sorry to say it might sound rude, but that is the most idiotic thing to ever think of.